Sylvester Stallone walked onto the Tonight Show stage not knowing he was about to create a moment so powerful, so unexpected, that it would captivate millions overnight. What happened next wasn't just a conversation. It became the most talked-about TV moment of the year, something so genuine that viewers couldn't look away. It was just another Tuesday evening at Studio 6B in 30 Rockefeller Plaza, New York City. The familiar blue and gold set gleamed under the studio lights. Production assistants darted between camera setups while audience members settled into their seats, buzzing with anticipation. They'd come expecting entertainment. They had no idea they were about to witness something extraordinary. Jimmy Fallon's pre-show ritual was unchanged, reviewing cue cards, checking talking points, the usual mix of celebrity gossip and planned viral games. Tonight's big guest, Sylvester Stallone, promoting his new director's cut of Rocky IV and his upcoming series about his family. The segment was mapped out like any other, some light banter, a funny anecdote or two, maybe a game involving egg roulette or lip-sync battles, nothing that would disrupt the carefully crafted formula that had made Fallon a late-night staple. Backstage, Stallone sipped water from a paper cup. He looked relaxed in a black shirt and navy blazer. At 76, still carrying himself with that unmistakable presence that had defined his 5 decades in Hollywood. A lifetime of playing fighters had given him a certain watchfulness, an economy of movement that made even simple gestures seem deliberate. He exchanged pleasantries with the production staff, cracked a few jokes with the makeup artist, but there was something contemplative in his eyes, something that suggested he was thinking about more than just the standard promotional circuit. 2 minutes, Mr. Stallone, called a production assistant. Sly nodded, straightened his jacket, and rolled his shoulders like he used to before filming those iconic boxing scenes. But tonight wasn't about throwing punches, at least not the kind you could see. The show began with Fallon's monologue, topical jokes about politics, viral videos, audience laughter right on cue. Then came the announcement everyone was waiting for. Ladies and gentlemen, he's a legend in every sense of the word, the star of Rocky, Rambo, and so many classics. Please welcome the one and only Sylvester Stallone. The audience erupted as The Roots played a snippet of the Rocky theme, that instantly recognizable anthem. Stallone strode onto the stage, smiling wide, waving to the crowd with genuine appreciation. He embraced Fallon with that famous half-hug and settled into the guest chair, looking comfortable, at ease, like a man who'd done this 1,000 times before. "Sly, man, it's so good to have you back," Fallon gushed with his characteristic enthusiasm. "Rocky IV director's cut, this is huge. I mean, this movie is already a classic. Why go back to it?" Stallone leaned forward slightly. "You know, Jimmy, some stories stay with you. They're not just movies. They become part of who you are. And sometimes you look back and think, I could have said more, could have gone deeper." Fallon nodded, but you could tell he was already mentally moving toward the planned jokes. "Well, you definitely went deep in those training montages. I tried that whole running in snow thing once, ended up with frostbite and 0 abs." The audience laughed on cue, but Stallone didn't take the expected comedic turn. "That's the thing about challenges," he said thoughtfully. "Everyone sees the glory moments, the victory, the raised arms, but few understand the solitude of the journey, what it costs to really commit to something." There was a subtle shift in the studio energy, almost imperceptible at first. Fallon sensed it too, a conversation veering off script into something more substantial than planned. He glanced briefly at his cue cards, then back at Stallone. "So, is that what made you want to revisit Rocky IV? Finding that deeper story?" "Partly," Stallone nodded, "but also understanding that stories have power. They shape how we see ourselves, what we believe is possible. When I wrote Rocky, I was broke, completely unknown, sleeping in a New Jersey bus station at one point." Fallon, seeing an opportunity to lighten the mood, jumped in. "Well, New Jersey will do that to you. I'm pretty sure that's in their tourism brochures. Visit NJ, you might write a classic movie out of desperation." The audience laughed, but the joke seemed to hang in the air, slightly out of place against the authenticity Stallone was offering. And that's when something unexpected happened. Jimmy's smile faltered just slightly, sensing perhaps that he'd misread the moment. Stallone didn't seem offended. He just paused, a beat of silence, the kind of moment most talk shows edit around, but this one felt important somehow. "You know what's interesting about comedy, Jimmy? he said in that familiar gravelly voice, not confrontational, just conversational. "It can either bring us closer to truth or help us avoid it altogether." The audience grew quiet. You could almost hear the producers in the control room shifting uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the segment they had mapped out. Fallon, to his credit, recognized something was happening, something beyond the usual promotional banter. That's actually really profound, Sly." "Not trying to be profound," Stallone smiled genuinely. "Just something I've been thinking about lately. In movies, in TV, even in these interviews, we have these patterns we fall into, these expected roles." He gestured between them, indicating their current setup. "You're the charming host. I'm the aging action star. We hit our marks, we tell our stories, everyone goes home entertained. But sometimes I wonder what would happen if we just talked, really talked about what matters." Something in his tone made everyone lean forward slightly. The audience, Fallon, even the cameramen. Fallon seemed to consider this invitation, then set aside his cue cards in a gesture that wasn't planned but felt right. "Okay, let's do that," he said with surprising sincerity. "What matters to Sylvester Stallone right now?" Stallone nodded appreciatively, recognizing the genuine question. What matters is legacy, not the Hollywood kind, not the star on the Walk of Fame or the box office numbers, but what you leave behind that helps someone else. He shifted in his chair, leaning forward slightly. "I've been lucky enough to create characters that mean something to people. Rocky, Rambo, these guys weren't just tough. They were vulnerable, they got knocked down, they faced impossible odds." The audience was completely silent now, not the awkward silence of a joke falling flat, but the electric silence of collective attention. But here's what I've learned after 50 years in this business: the characters that last, that really mean something to people, they're not the ones who never fail, they're the ones who never quit. Fallon nodded, genuinely engaged now. That's Rocky's whole story, right? Not about winning, but about standing up. Exactly. Stallone pointed at him, animated now, and I think that's what people connect with, not the fantasy of being invincible, but the truth that resilience matters more than perfection. He glanced out at the audience. We're living in a time where everyone's trying to look perfect. Social media, filters, carefully curated lives, but life isn't perfect. It's messy. It knocks you down repeatedly, and the only question that matters is, are you going to get back up? A spontaneous burst of applause rippled through the studio, not prompted by any applause sign but sparked by recognition of something authentic. "You know," Stallone continued once the applause settled, "people often ask me about motivation, how to stay driven, how to keep fighting for whatever matters to them." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "The secret isn't some magic formula, it's understanding that failure isn't your enemy. Comfort is your enemy." Another wave of murmurs and nods from the audience. Getting comfortable with where you are, settling for less than what you're capable of, that's the real defeat. Fallon leaned in, genuinely curious now. "But after all you've accomplished, don't you get to be comfortable?" Stallone smiled, a flash of that familiar, Rocky determination. "Comfort isn't the goal, Jimmy. Growth is the goal. Impact is the goal. Making something that outlasts you is the goal." He looked directly at the camera now, as if speaking to each viewer individually. The greatest danger isn't failing, it's succeeding at things that don't really matter. The studio fell completely silent. Producers exchanged glances behind the cameras. This wasn't just good TV anymore, it was something you rarely saw in the polished world of late-night entertainment: raw authenticity. Fallon seemed momentarily at a loss for words, clearly affected by the unexpected depth of the conversation. I think everyone here felt that, Sly." Stallone nodded, then, with perfect timing, broke the intensity with a self-deprecating smile. "Hey, who knew Rocky had a philosopher inside him, right? Maybe I should have let him talk more between punches." The audience laughed, relieved and appreciative of the moment of lightness after such depth. "But, seriously," Stallone continued, "I look at where we are today, especially young people facing a world that feels increasingly uncertain, and I think about what Rocky would say to them." He paused, his expression thoughtful. He'd say that it's not about how hard you can hit, it's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. That message mattered 45 years ago, and I think it matters even more today. Fallon nodded, abandoning all pretense of the planned segment now. Do you think that's why these characters still resonate? Why do people still dress up as Rocky for Halloween or watch these movies with their kids decades later? I think people are hungry for stories about resilience, about ordinary people doing extraordinary things not because they're special or chosen, but because they simply refuse to stay down. Stallone gestured expressively with his hands. In Rocky's world, there are no shortcuts, no overnight success stories, just hard work, perseverance, heart. He smiled, a mixture of pride and humility. I didn't know when I wrote that first script, scribbling on a spiral notebook with a dog at my feet, that it would change my life, change cinema in some ways. I just knew I had to tell that story about someone who got a shot and gave everything he had. The applause started somewhere in the back of the studio, building until the entire audience was on their feet. A standing ovation in the middle of an interview, something you rarely see on late-night television. Fallon stood too, clapping with genuine admiration. I don't think we planned for this tonight, folks, but I think we all needed to hear it. As the applause finally settled and everyone sat back down, Fallon tried to regain some semblance of the show's format. We're supposed to play a game now where you punch through these paper Rocky pictures, but honestly, that feels kind of trivial after what you just shared. Stallone laughed good-naturedly. Hey, I'm still up for punching things. Some habits die hard. The audience laughed, the tension broken, but something had fundamentally changed in the room. This wasn't just another promotional stop anymore. It had become something memorable, something real. Before we do that, though, Stallone said, can I just say one more thing to everyone watching? Fallon nodded, giving him the floor, completely surrendered to wherever this unusual segment might go. Success isn't about being fearless, Stallone said, looking directly into the camera. It's about feeling the fear and moving forward anyway. It's about understanding that your current situation doesn't determine your destination. His voice took on that familiar, Rocky intensity that had inspired generations of fans. Life's going to test you. It's going to hit you with everything it's got. But it's not about avoiding the hits. It's about taking them and saying, "Is that all you got?" He punctuated this with that famous Rocky gesture, fists slightly raised, shoulders squared, and the audience erupted again, phones raised throughout the studio, capturing the moment, producers in the control room already knowing this would be everywhere by morning. Well, I think we just got a masterclass in life from Rocky himself, Fallon said when the noise finally died down. And honestly, I don't think any egg roulette game can follow that, so let's just go to commercial with a huge thank you to Sylvester Stallone. As the cameras cut away, the applause continued. Audience members turned to each other, visibly moved. Crew members exchanged looks of amazement. A production assistant whispered to another, "Did that just happen? That was incredible." Within hours, clips of the interview were everywhere. Not the usual viral games or celebrity impressions that typically defined Fallon's show, but this unexpected moment of wisdom and inspiration from a Hollywood icon who'd momentarily dropped all pretense. Stallone just gave the most real talk show interview ever, was trending on Twitter by midnight. TikTok creators were sampling his words over motivational clips. YouTube comment sections filled with personal stories of how Rocky had inspired people through difficult times. A high school football coach in Ohio played the clip for his team before their championship game. A young entrepreneur in Seattle watched it on repeat after receiving her 5th rejection from investors. A recovery group in Dallas made, "It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward," their unofficial motto. What made the moment resonate wasn't just what Stallone said, it was how he said it, without rehearsal, without agenda, just a man sharing hard-earned wisdom in a media landscape where authenticity often feels scripted. The Tonight Show's social media accounts posted the full segment with the simple caption, "Some moments can't be planned." It quickly became their most watched clip of the year. Morning talk shows dissected the interview, not for controversy or gossip, but for the refreshing glimpse of something genuine in an entertainment world often criticized for superficiality. "There's a reason Stallone has endured for 5 decades, wrote one culture critic. In an industry built on illusion, he somehow manages to remain real. 3 days later, at a small deli in Manhattan, Stallone was grabbing coffee when an elderly man approached. "Mr. Stallone," he said, voice slightly shaky, "I watched you on Fallon the other night. I just wanted to say thank you for those words about not staying down. I needed that right now." Stallone shook his hand warmly, asked his name, and spent 5 minutes talking with him away from other customers. No cameras captured this exchange. No publicists orchestrated it. It was just a moment between two people, exactly the kind of genuine connection he had talked about on the show, and perhaps that's why the interview had struck such a chord. In a culture saturated with a polished performance, Stallone had simply shown up as himself, reminding viewers that beyond the characters, beyond the fame, the most powerful story is always the human one. That night on Fallon hadn't been about promoting a movie or playing a game or telling a funny anecdote. It had been about something that rarely breaks through the carefully constructed world of late-night television: truth, wisdom, authenticity. In Los Angeles, a young actor watched the clip for the third time, taking notes on how Stallone carried himself, how he spoke with conviction without ever raising his voice, how he turned what could have been just another talk show appearance into something people wouldn't forget. In Chicago, a father showed it to his teenage son who was going through a difficult time at school. "See, even Rocky Balboa gets knocked down. It's what you do next that matters." In a film school classroom in Austin, a professor played the segment, then asked her students, "What made this resonate when most talk show clips are forgotten by morning?" One student raised her hand. Because it wasn't designed to go viral, it was just real. And maybe that was the lesson. In a world of algorithms and engagement metrics, of calculated controversy and manufactured moments, nothing connects like genuine human truth. A week later, Jimmy Fallon opened his show differently. "Last week, something special happened here when Sylvester Stallone reminded us all that sometimes the most entertaining thing isn't a game or a joke or a celebrity anecdote, but wisdom that comes from a life fully lived." He looked directly into the camera. "So, we're going to try something new here sometimes. We're going to make space for real conversations alongside all the fun and games because that night showed us that's what you want from us." The studio audience applauded enthusiastically, confirmation that something had indeed shifted. Meanwhile, Stallone went back to his work, not particularly surprised by the reaction. He'd been speaking the truth for decades through his characters. The only difference was this time he'd done it as himself. When asked about the interview in a subsequent podcast, he simply shrugged and smiled. "I just said what I believe. I've been knocked down enough times to know the getting up part is what matters." The host pressed him on whether he'd planned to turn a standard promotional appearance into something so meaningful. Stallone laughed, that familiar rumbling sound. "Planning has its place, but the moments that matter most, you can't rehearse those. You just have to be present enough to recognize them when they come." And perhaps that's what viewers connected with most. Not just the wisdom of his words, but the authenticity of the moment itself. A reminder that beneath the celebrity, beneath the characters and the fame, there's still something real. In a world hungry for meaning, for inspiration that doesn't feel manufactured, for truth that doesn't come with an agenda, Stallone had delivered something valuable. Not because he'd tried to create a viral moment, but because for a few minutes on a Tuesday night, he'd simply been himself. And in doing so, he'd reminded everyone watching that our stories matter, that resilience is more important than perfection, that getting knocked down is inevitable, but getting back up is a choice. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is just show up as yourself completely. No filters, no performance, no pretense, just human truth. If this story of resilience resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button right now and share it with someone who needs to hear this message today. Are you someone who keeps getting up no matter how many times life knocks you down? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that cut through the noise and speak to what matters. Remember, your journey matters, and we're in this together.